Okay, so good morning, everyone. We are continuing our pass through Masechet Nazir. We're in the 6th chapter dealing with the various prohibitions, and now we're going to change in a moment. We're going to change to discussing now actually the procedures of the closing ceremony. And so let me open my document, my email, and we'll get started. And we are again continuing this process of ending the Nazirut. We're offering the sacrifices, we're shaving the hair, etc. And so we pick up with what happens next. So again, you've shaved the hair, you've thrown it on, you've gotten some sauce, you put the sauce on the hair, so now you have nice clumps. You throw it underneath the fire of the shlamim, and now what do you do next? So Hayim Avashal, this is where at the Mishnah 1, 2, 3, 5 lines up on Mem Hayim and Bet. Hayim Avashal is a shlamim o shalkan. You can either cook it or do shalika. So what does shalika mean? So let's take a look. We have two different opinions. First, on the left-hand side of the page, the Mefarish says, "O shalkan she'ena mavushal yafeh." You don't cook it that well. Okay, so that is one opinion, is that shalkan means that it's less cooked. But if you take a look in Tosfos, third line from the very bottom, O shalkan bishul yoter midai, then you cook it extra. So both of those are the two different opinions. In general, it seems more frequently, first of all, shulchan definitely gets used in each method, in each way during the course of Shas. Here, it certainly would seem to me more likely that it's more cooked, although the argument that it's less cooked is the following, because what happens then? So hakohen notel et hazroa b'shela min ha'ayil. The kohen then takes the cooked leg, the first front leg of the shlamim, v'chala matzah achat min hasal, and he takes one of the unleavened loaves of bread, one of the matzah loaves, urakik matzah, and one of the unleavened wafers, which I think means that it was cooked with oil, the nosin al kapei hanazir minifan, and he puts them on the hands of the nazir, and then he waves them. The akakach huter hanazir lishtot yain lihitamei l'meitim, and then the nazir is allowed to drink wine and come in contact with the dead, so and become tamei for a mace. So that's the process. And again, all right, so now let's see. So next is Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon then says, as we turn to Mem Vav Amud Aleph, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kevan Shenizrak Alav Echad Min Hadamim, once one of the bloods has been sprinkled, Huter HaNazir Lishtot B'Yayin Lihitamei L'Meitim. That is enough to allow the Nazir to be permitted to drink wine and to come in contact with the Tamei mate. And indeed, there's a lot of sense to that, because that is also when the Nazir cuts their hair. So in any event, we'll see some more of that at the end of the day today. So that's our Mishnah. And again, we're going to have a waving of the item. And what I was going to say is that one reason to argue that maybe the Mefarish is correct here is because if you cook it extra, it would be very difficult to wave, because the whole thing is going to fall apart. And that's presumably what that extra cooking is going to do. But in any event, we have this machlokas between the Mefarish and Tosfos. So now we take it to the Gemara, and the Gemara is going to cite a brisa that provides the bases for the two different viewpoints that we had. So let's see if we can see that in our Gemara. So Tana Rabbanan, we have a brisa, va'achar yishteha nazir yayin. So, and afterwards, this is a pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Vav pasuk Kaf, where it says that afterwards, after all of this ceremony, then the nazir can drink wine. So what does that mean? Achar hamasim kulam divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, like the Tanakama in our Mishnah, says that you got to wait until everything is done. Everything meaning all of the cooking, everything has to be done. Even the waving has to be done. And then that's when the people are able to drink wine. No, achar masa yichidi. No, you only have to wait for one action. So my time, Mahu derabanan. So on some level, the easy way to understand achar Yishta Nazir Yayin, that afterwards it implies in general, you'd think that it means after everything. So how in the world do the rabbis say, again, the rabbis whose opinion is like Rabbi Shimon, right? Rabbi Shimon says all you need is one action, namely the sprinkling of the blood with blood, which is one of the first actions associated with the sacrifice. And that's when the sacrifice becomes a valid sacrifice. So why is that sufficient? So my time of Durabanan, Ksiv Hacha Ba'achar Yishta Nazir, Ksiv Hasam Achar Hiskalcho Es Naziro. In one, there, the word after, the word achar, is in two consecutive psukim. In the first pasuk, it's talking about after he shaves his head. Well, that is clearly referring to after one action, namely the shaving of the head. And so mahasam achar masa yechidi, avkan achar masa yechidi. So as a result, since the first in pasuk yud tet, it says achar and it means after one action, so too in pasuk kaf, when it says achar, it means after one action. Well, 1 second. Ema ad deika tarvaihu. Maybe it should mean the same thing, meaning it's that it's after that we should say it almost in the other direction, that after should mean after everything. And so it means after both the shaving and the blood. So and Tosos, if we take a look at Hashta, if we take a look at Ema ad ikatarvaihu, so karbanot v'tiglachat, meaning after you've done both the sacrifices and the shaving. The ha'achar tiglachato, the amar, and that which the Torah says that you should wait until after the shaving, achar kol avodas hakarbanot. It really means to say until after all of the karbanot. And so that is one possibility. Why don't we say that? And so then the Gemara responds, and this is and Tosos gives us the end of the response. Im kain gzeirashav de achar lamali, and the Gemara says it in slightly different words. The Gemara, back into the Gemara where it says I hachi gzeirashav lamali, right? So that this is now third line up. In the narrow lines on Mem Vav Amud Aleph, and so as a result, why would we need it? Meaning, if in fact it's to be taken, if we're supposed to read this verse as literally as possible, well, then we would not need a Gzeira Shava. A Gzeira Shava says that we learn from one thing to another because it uses similar words, and you can't make a Gzeira Shava up on your own. Gzeira Shava has to be something that is passed down through tradition. And so as a result, if given the fact that this was a Gzeira Shava that was passed down through tradition, so it must mean something extra. Now, when I was listening to Rabbi Rosner give the shir for this daf, he shared the following, which is from Rabbi Moshe Alshich, and I found that also Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg in his Ketav HaKabbalah makes a similar comment, because one of the things that we just said, that we just read it, is va'achar Yishteha Nazir Yayin, that after he's done the entire procedure, so then the Nazir can drink wine. But what's the problem with that is that he's no longer a Nazir. Why are we referring to this person as a Nazir, right? Good question. Because it could have just said, V'achar Yishteh Yayin. And afterwards, the regular guy can drink wine. And so they both say the following concept, that in fact, as we, when the person is a Nazir, the person becomes a Nazir in order to change themselves and become a better person, a person who is less subject to the desires of the life that we live, and in particular to the desires associated with alcohol. And so as a result, when he has the wish and the hope and the prayer that the Torah is effectively offering, according to these commentaries, is that when the person then has the wine after his being a Nazir, it is not the Nazir of the original person. It's a changed man, exactly, a changed person. And so as a result, and of course it has important lessons for us and throughout our lives. As we go through our lives, we should allow our experiences to influence us and to turn us into better people and better Jews. So that's a nice Torah thought associated with this. All right, so now we're going to talk about the waving and ask the following question. Does the waving have to happen in order, according to the rabbis who say that everything needs to be done, that we need all of the actions to take place in order for the Nazir to be permitted? Does that mean that the waving is ma'akev, that it's required in such a way that if you fail to do the waving, then you will not be allowed to drink wine or become tamei to a mate? So that's the question that we're going to look at now. So Amar Rav Tenufa ben Nazir me'akevet, that the waving of the animal's foreleg with the matzah and the rikik and the wafer, that all is required and prevents us from doing something. And the Mefarish on the right-hand side of the page, Amar Rav Tenufa ben Nazir ma'akeves milishtot yayin v'lit melamesim, that it prevents one from being able to drink wine and become tamei mate. So that's the question, that's the statement that Rav has, that is in fact going to be the case, that if you don't wave, you can still not yet drink wine or become tamei mate. So now the Gemara asks, Aliba Daman, according to whose opinion is this? Is that according to the rabbis or according to Rabbi Eliezer? Well, Ilema Aliba de Rabbanan Tiglachas Amri Rabbanan Loma Akva Tanufa mi boy. So 1 second, if it was the rabbis, and now we're going to have two versions of this, okay? So just so that you're aware, we're going to go through the Gemara that we're about to go through. We're going to end up with two different versions of this. This first version, and we're going to now say, who is it like? Is it like the rabbis? Well, it doesn't make sense for it to be like the rabbis, because the rabbis say when it comes to shaving one's head, that is not me'akevet, meaning that even if one never shaved their head, and as part of the ceremony, they would be allowed, after you offer the sacrifices, you'd be allowed to drink wine and become tamei mate, and presumably shave your head at some later time. So as a result of that, how could it possibly be if, and Tosfos says it the following way, if we take a look at Hashta Tiglachat, the 1, 2, 3, 5th Tosfos on the page, Shehi beguf hanazir, when it comes to shaving, which is involves the body of the Nazir himself, lo me'akevet, it does not stop us from being able to drink wine and become tamei mate. Tenufa, when it comes to the waving, she'ein me'akevet b'kol makom mibai, the tenufa, the waving ceremony, is never a necessary step to anything throughout the rest of the Torah. It's a required step, but you don't have to do it. If you don't do it, it doesn't undo anything. So as a result, how could it be, according to the rabbis, that the waving would be required? Ella aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. So it must be that we're talking about according to Rabbi Eliezer, because according to Rabbi Eliezer, now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the problem is the following. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says, Ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer, 1 second, Pshita, that the problem is that if you want to say that it's Rabbi Eliezer, that's obvious. So why did Rav need to tell it? Because Ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer, Achar Masim Kulam. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that you have to wait until all the steps. And so if in fact the person cannot drink wine or become tamei mate until all of the steps take place, well, of course he has to engage in the waving. That's one of the steps that need to take place. So it's not really any great teaching. So why did Rav need to say this? So now we're going to answer why Rav said it. Specifically, Mahu Detemo, what might I have thought? I might have thought the following. Kavan de Inyan Kapara Shiare Mitzvahi, that when it comes to the atonement with respect to various other sacrifices, the waving is just a residual part, a shiare, the leftover part of the mitzvah. It's part of the mitzvah, but it's not essential. As we just said a moment ago, the rabbis would not hold that it's essential because it's never essential. So Hachanami, I might have thought lo ta'akev, that I would have thought also here it should not be essential. And so as a result, without Rab's statement, I might have thought that just as the waving is never essential anywhere else, so too it's not essential here. So Kamash Malan, Rab tells us actually it is essential. So now that we heard, and now we understand Rab, and we understand why he's saying, so now we have a question, because Umi Me'akva, does in fact Rabbi Eliezer hold that it is me'akev? Is that actually a valid opinion? Because we have a brisa that teaches the following: B'hatanya zos Torah Nazir. Here is the law of the Nazir. So that's what the Torah says. This is in Bamidbar Parak Vav Pasuk Kaf Aleph. That's the very end of the parsha of Nazirut, and it says, and so as a result, the point is that the process is the process, and this and the brisa continues. Ben sheyesh lo kapayim, ben she'ein lo kapayim. This means, as we're going to understand this brisa now, because we're going to understand the brisa in a different way shortly. But right now we're understanding this brisa as meaning that whether or not a person has palms, meaning if they God forbid, don't have hands, it doesn't make a difference. The law is the law, meaning they finished the process and they're able to presumably drink. It doesn't make a difference. No matter what, they can be released from their prohibitions, even if they don't engage in a waving. Well, one second. So that seems to show that the waving is not ma'akev. Well, one second. If that's your read of that brisa to say that nothing is ma'akev and it doesn't make a difference whether you have hands or you don't have hands, you're not going to need to wave. Tanya zos Torah Nazir. Well, one second. We also have another brisa that uses almost identical language, but seems to come to the opposite conclusion, because what does that say? It says zos Torah Nazir, ben sheyesh lo sayar, ben she'ein lo sayar. It doesn't make a difference whether the person has hair or not. Even if the person is bald, this is the process that you go through. And hachinami delo ma'akva, and there are you saying that shaving the head is not something that's ma'akev? The shaving the head is something that is ma'akev, because we have the following brisa. Tanya, we learned in the following brisa that suggests that in fact the shaving of the head is ma'akev, because what does it say? Nazir memora, you got a bald Nazir. Beit Shammai omrim, Beit Shammai says, Ein sarach lahavir tar al rosho. There's no need to pass a razor over his head. Ubeit Hillel omrim, sarach lahavir tar al rosho. No, you do need to pass the razor over his head. V'amar Ravina, and Ravina, in explaining this brisa, it explains how we know that in fact it shows that it is ma'akev. So my eino tzarech levet Shammai, what does it mean that he does not need to pass the razor over the person's head? Eino tzarech ein lo takana. It means that he doesn't need to, because there's nothing to do. If you were to pass a razor over a bald person's head, it won't shave anything. And so as a result, there's no shaving. And so when Beit Shammai says you don't need to put the razor over the person's head, it's because the person can never become a non-Nazir. He's just plain stuck. So Halaves Hillel, yesh lo takana. But the implication would be is that for Beit Hillel, he would have a way of fixing it. Namely, he could use the razor over his head. But the bottom line is that we're understanding whether even though the person has no hair, the shaving is definitely ma'akev. Whether according you can actually understand it both according to Beit Shammai and to Beit Hillel, the guy needs to put the razor over his head, and if he doesn't do it or can't do it because he has no hair, well then tough luck. He is not going to be he's going to be stuck being a Nazir forever. And if that's true, well then what we've said is that Zos Torah Nazir, bein sheyesh lo seir, bein she'ein lo seir, is showing that it is ma'akev. And so how could you try to say the bein sheyesh lo kapayim, bein she'ein lo kapayim is saying it's not ma'akev? So just as it's ma'akev that you have to shave the hair, presumably it's ma'akev that you have to have the waving. And so as a result, now we understand. So that all works, because that explains why Rav would say tenufa benazir ma'akevet. That's why he says that it is a critical element, and without it, you have not finished the procedures and you are still a nazir. Behind the Rebbe Padas, and all of this that we've just learned is consistent with Rebbe Padas. The Amar Rebbe Padas, Beit Shammai, Rebbe Eliezer, Amru Davar Achad. That Beit Shammai and Rebbe Eliezer saying the same thing. What is that? How do we understand that? My Rebbe Eliezer, which statement of Rebbe Eliezer is Rebbe Padas referring to? Tanya, because we have the following brisa: Ein lo bohen v'regel. If in the connection with the mitzora, in the process of the tahara process for a mitzora, at the end of a person's affliction with a skin ailment, that is a religious skin ailment that has been viewed by a Kohen and has been determined to be tzarat. And so as a result, the person has to leave the camp. And now finally the tzarat is healed and he comes back and he's going to offer various sacrifices. And of those sacrifices, some of the blood is going to be put on his right hand, right thumb, and his right big toe. So now what happens is Ein lo bohen yad v'regel. What happens if he doesn't have that toe or that thumb? Ein lo tara olamit. According Divrei Rebbe Eliezer, according to Rebbe Eliezer, there is nothing he can do. He is never going to become tahor. And so this is the Rebbe Eliezer that is just like the Beit Shammai. Just as Beit Shammai says that there's nothing to be done for a bald Nazir, so too Rebbe Eliezer says there's nothing to be done for a mitzora that has no right thumb or right big toe. There are other opinions, however. Rabbi Shimon Omer Yenichenu al Mekomo v'yetzei. Rabbi Shimon says no, just put it where the thumb would have been. The Chachamim Omrim Yeniach al shel small v'yetzei. And the Chachamim say no, just put it on the left hand. You don't need to use the right hand. So those are the different opinions, but in the bottom line is that where have we gone and where have we come? So what we've said is Rav says that the waving is a mandatory thing, and we've concluded that in fact that statement makes sense. It's consistent with Rabbi Eliezer, who says that you need to finish everything, and it's consistent with the understanding of the various brisas that say that whether or not one has palms, the law applies. Namely, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, that law would be to say that you're obligated to do it, and if you don't do it, then you are still a Nazir. So that is read number 1 of this Gemara. And now we're going to offer read number 2 of this Gemara. And the main difference between read number 1 and read number 2 is in our understanding of the brisas that say Zos Toras HaNazir, whether it's referring to the palms or referring to the hair. Those two brisas are going to be reinterpreted, but it's going to be driven by the fact that we're not going to have an answer to the question of it's obvious if Rav was talking about Rebbe Eliezer. So let's see. So Lishna Achrina Amrila Amrav Tanufa Benazir Ma'akevis. Again, alternative language, but we begin the same way. Rav says that the waving is a requirement. Okay, so this is, and now we're going to reverse things. So Aliba Daman, who is it that it's according to? Ilema Aliba de Rebbe Eliezer, if you want to say that it's according to Rebbe Eliezer. Now, again, remember the last time we said it was Aliba de Rabbanan, we began with the question, and we said it couldn't be. But now we're going to say maybe it's according to Rebbe Eliezer, who we said it was according to the last time. But then we have a problem because Pshita, it's obvious. And so last time we offered an answer to that question, but this time we're not going to offer it. So Ha'amar Rebbe Eliezer, Achar Ma Asim Kulam. Rebbe Eliezer says you have to wait until everything. So it can't be according to Rebbe Eliezer. So Ella Aliba de Rabbanan. Rather, it's according to the rabbis. Well, now again, last time we had the question, one second, Hashta yesh lomer tiglachas amri rabbanim lo ma'akva tenufa mibai. We said, as we asked the last time, and then that last time we had no answer to this, and now we will offer an answer to it. Last time, again, we said, how could it be the rabbis? The rabbis say that even shaving one's head is not ma'akiv. And if shaving one's head is not ma'akiv, how could it possibly be that waving is ma'akiv? So so now we're going to try to answer it by saying, no, maybe in fact, the rabbis say that it is ma'akiv. Umilo ma'akva. Well, one second, is waving really not ma'akiv? V'hatanya zos toras hanazir. Bein sheyesh lo kapayim uvein she'ein lo kapayim. So we're going to now understand the brisa of zos toras hanazir the exact opposite way. And here Tosos explains, but we won't go into it inside. Tosos explains that this is based on, to understand this new read of this brisa, we have to take two steps. The first is we have a concept called kol she'ena ra'ui lebila, bila ma'akevet bo. This is a rule that we saw, we've seen it before as we've passed through Maseches Nazir, but it comes from Maseches Menachos. And in that, we have the concept that if you have a certain amount of flour with and a certain amount of oil, the question is how much flour do you have that it's too much to mix in a mixing with the oil? And if in fact you have too much and you try to mix it anyway, we're going to say that the mixing doesn't work and the mixing is required. Whereas if in fact you have, meaning that you have to do it over again. Yeah. Whereas if in fact you have the proper amounts of the flour and the oil, even though you didn't mix it, you don't need to mix it. So it's almost counterintuitive. Right. The point is that when you have the ability to do something, so we're going to say that it's as if you did the item. But when you don't have the ability to do it, we're going to say you need to do it. And now that you weren't able to do it, we have a problem and you have to do it over again. And so that is the concept of kol she'eno roi labila, anything that is not fit for mixing, bila ma'akevet bo, then you actually have to do the mixing, meaning that you're going to have to do the whole thing over again so that you have the right proportions. And so too here, what are we saying? We're saying that if a person, God forbid, does not have hands, so now all of a sudden he has no ability to do the waving. And so as a result, now we're going to say because he has no hands, the waving is required. But if, Baruch Hashem, the person has hands, well then because he has hands and therefore could do the waving, we're going to say it doesn't have to be. So when we say Zos Toras HaNazir, Bein sheyesh lo kapayim, bein she'ein lo kapayim, we're saying the idea is that we should tie the two together. That actually, just as when we say with no hands, the person, because he lacks the hands, we say that he needs to have done the waving, and so therefore it's impossible. We're going to say, because of Zos Toras HaNazir, we're going to apply the same rule to where he does have hands. So even though in the case of the mixing of the flour and the oil, the fact that you have the ability to mix it is sufficient, because of Zos Toras HaNazir, we're going to say that when it comes to the waving of the Nazir Shlamim offering, we're going to say that no, even if he does have hands, he needs to engage in the waving. And so doesn't that show that waving is ma'akev? So therefore, the rabbis do say that in fact the waving is ma'akev, and so as a result, the Rav could be saying like the rabbis. Well, one second, but we have another brisa, because we have the brisa of Zos Toras HaNazir, Bein sheyesh lo seyar, bein she'ein lo seyar. We have a brisa that says it doesn't make a difference whether the person has hair or not. Well, hachinami de ma'akva, you're going to tell me that in that situation, and again, this is the exact reverse understanding of this brisa that we gave it 2 minutes ago, that you're going to tell me that that is a brisa that says that lacking hair is ma'akev, because Bahatanya, but we have of another brisa that, again, we are now going to interpret differently than we interpreted before, where it says Nazir Mimorat, a Nazir who is totally bald. Beit Shammai Omrim Eino Tzarach Lahavir Tar al Rosho. He does not need to pass a razor over his head. And Beit Hillel Omrim Tzarach, and Beit Hillel says he does need to. So, and Amar Rabbi Avina, and Rabbi Avina says, my Tzarach LeBeit Hillel. What does it mean that he needs to, according to Beit Hillel? Tzarach ve'ein lo takana. He needs to, but he has no ability to fix it. So now this opinion, which we had associated, which we had associated with which Ravina, as opposed to Rabbi Avina, Ravina had associated with Beit Shammai, now is being associated with Beit Hillel. Namely, Beit Hillel is the one who says that there's nothing to do, that there is no way to fix the problem. And LeBeit Shammai, yesh lo takana, but Beit Shammai says that there is a way to fix it, meaning he doesn't need to do it in the first place because he doesn't have any hair, and so as a result, his Nazirut is resolved, even though he lacks hair. So. And the Gemara concludes, Ufliga de Rabbi Padas, and now this approach conflicts with Rabbi Padas because Rabbi Padas had understood that that Beit Shammai was consistent with Rabbi Eliezer's position of saying that it was ma'akev, and of something was ma'akev. For Rabbi Eliezer, it was putting the blood on the thumb and the big toe. And for Beit Shammai, we had understood that according to Rabbi Padas, Beit Shammai was saying that it was ma'akev to have hair that needs to be shaved. And now we're saying that no, Beit Shammai, according to this read, according to the second approach, Beit Shammai is the one who's saying that Nazirut does not require to actual shaving. And so we see from this Mishnah, from this Baraisa that we're now quoting, that in fact it does not need. So as a result, we end up saying that in fact there is, according to Beit Hillel, there is no remedy, and in fact, it is, according to Beit Hillel, something that is ma'akev. And so as a result, because now we're saying that Beit Hillel is the one who says that it's ma'akev, so now everything works, and Rav can even be like the rabbis. So let's go over exactly what we've done. What we've said is the following, because it's very confusing, because especially you have two opposite versions. So first, Rav, in both cases, Rav says that waving is ma'akev. In the first version, on some level, it's a very simple understanding. Rav is going to just say like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that everything has to be done. And so, of course, Rav is saying that everything has to be done. Now, why did we need to even bother teaching that? Because isn't that obvious? Well, I might have thought that because waving is never ma'akev anywhere else, so as a result, it shouldn't be ma'akev here. So as a result, Rav teaches us his teaching, and everything is wonderful. Yes, we have two other brisas that seem to maybe suggest something different, but in the end, we say that actually it's exactly what we thought, which is that that according to Rav and according to Rabbi Eliezer, it is ma'akev, and according to the rabbis, it's not ma'akev. And so everything is wonderful in that approach. That was approach number one. In approach number two, again, Rav says that the waving is ma'akev. But now we don't answer the question of isn't it obvious to be Rabbi Eliezer, and say it's so obvious that it's Rabbi Eliezer that it must be that Rav is talking even according to the rabbis. And so as a result, we end up saying that even according to the rabbis, the waving by a Nazir is ma'akev. And we base that on the concept of kol sheroi lebila bila ma'akevet bo, that because the person lacked hands, we're going to say that it is ma'akev, and we're going to use the brisa that connects this and says that there's one rule by Nazir. The same rule that applies to the lack of hands applies to the existence of hands. And so based on that, based on bila kol sheroi lebila bila ma'akevet bo, and the fact that we're going to tie the hands case with the no hands case, ends up that we end up saying that actually even the rabbis say that waving of the shlamim is ma'akev, and so as a result, Rav's statement can be understood as consistent with the rabbis. Okay, so all of that very confusing, but bottom line is we have two views of Rav saying that it's ma'akev. Now, the 6th chapter of Maseches Nazir is going to conclude with two Mishnayos that deal with additional problems in the concluding ceremony, starting with a problem with the sacrifice. We'll do the second to last Mishnah and its Gemara now, and we'll leave the last Mishnah and the rest of the final words of Maseches Nazir's 6th chapter for tomorrow. So let's take a look. So Gilach al Hazebach, if you offer the first sacrifice for Zoom tomorrow for Zoom, will be about 45 minutes after Shabbos ends. I believe that's going to, and it's going to be the last time that we're going to do the Zoom after the Zoom Daf Yomi after Shabbos, because the clock will change this week, and so we will be moving the Shabbos Daf to an hour before Mincha, or an hour or 45 minutes before Mincha. Will depend on the week and depend on the Masechas that we're learning. All right, but in any event, and it'll depend on most significantly, it'll depend on what Eli says. So who's doing most of the Shabbosim. So all right, so Gilach al Hazebach. So again, the person shaved after doing the first sacrifices, which is what he's supposed to do. He can shave as soon as we offer the first sacrifices. But then what happens? The Nimsa Puzzle. It turns out that sacrifice was invalid. Oh my gosh. Well, now what happens? And Tosfos offers, I said at the beginning that we're going to have a bunch of Tosfos, so here we have a bunch of Tosfos. So Nishbach Damo o Yatsa o Nitma, that either the blood spilled or it left the sanctuary or it became Tameh. So now it's invalid. Well, what happens? Tiglachto Pisula, his shaving becomes invalid. And Tosfos says, because in the end, none of the blood of any of the sacrifices has been offered in a kosher manner. List him. It's as if robbers came and shaved him. He wasn't shaving properly. The gilcho list him la'achar malot, and if you were to get shaved by robbers after the end of your 30 days or whatever your period of Nazirut is, Amrin and Reish Perkin, we said earlier in our parak, the Rebbe Eliezer Soter Zion, L'Ravan and Shloshim, that the Rebbe Eliezer says that you need to do 7 days, you need 7 more days of growth, and the rabbis say you need 30 days of growth in order to have enough hair to be worth shaving. So as a result, you're stuck. If God for and of course this could be against the person's will. The Kohen could just trip and fall, and all the blood could spill, and there'll be nothing to be done about it. And not only that, uzvachav alo alulo, and then any other sacrifices that he brings, they won't count. And of course, the first sacrifice won't count either. So gilach al chatas. Now, what happens? So now we're going to, and let's take a look at that. Uzvachav lo alu lo, back into Tosfos. Last of the wide lines at the top of the Tosfos, I'm Vav on Babet. Shar hazvachim, all the other sacrifices, shehikriv acharei hitgalachat, after his shaving, psula, all of them would be puzzle, because lo alu lo, they won't help him. Daho v'hayat sarach lishos ad sheyagdil saro, he needs to, because he now needs to wait until his hair grows. Ubehakravit shar hazvachim lo haya roy litgalachat. He's bringing those carbonot when he isn't ready to shave, and so yesh lahachshav hazvachim kilu hikriv kodem otok milos. So it's as if he brought the other sacrifices before or even during his days of Nazirut, and so as a result, he is not. Those sacrifices don't count either. So now let's give an example. So gilach al chatas shelo lishma. What happens if he shaved after a sin offering that was offered shelo lishma, and a sin offering that's offered lo lishma is considered invalid? So again, this is another case of invalidity. Lishman, and then he brought all the other sacrifices were brought for the proper reasoning. Tiklach to psula. Not only is his shaving not good, uzvachav lo alulo. None of his sacrifices are going to count. Gilach al ha'ola o al hashlamim shalolishman. And similarly, according to the Tanakama, now we're going to have a machlokas. The Tanakama says that if you were to bring an ola or a shlamim without the right intention. Now, in this case, it is considered a valid sacrifice. An ola or a shlamim brought for the wrong, for the wrong person or for the wrong intention is considered a valid sacrifice. It's just a voluntary sacrifice, and you don't fulfill your obligation for whatever sacrifice you had originally needed to do. And so as a result, and then he brings whatever other korbanot for the right purpose. Well, tiglach to psula uzvachav lo alula. So again, his shaving is not valid, and his other and all of his sacrifices don't count. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and he says, no, oso hazevach lo alalo, the sacrifice that he brought for the wrong purpose will not satisfy for him, will not be count. But abal shar zvachim alu, any sacrifice that he offers, meaning not only is his cutting his hair valid, but his sacrifices that he leaves are also okay. And we will see the explanation for that in just a moment in the Gemara. What happens if he shaved after offering all three sacrifices? V'nimsa ekan mehen kasher, as long as one of them is found to be kosher, tiglach tok sheira, his shaving is valid. V'yavi shar zvachim, and anything that was not was invalid, he just needs to bring new ones. So Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava in the Gemara now explains Rabbi Shimon's position. Zos omeres kasav Rabbi Shimon. This shows that Rabbi Shimon holds Nazir shegileach al shami nedava yatsa. That what happens if instead of, remember that he's bringing three sacrifices. He's bringing a chatas, an ola, and a shlamim. And now instead of bringing any of the three required sacrifices, he decides that he wants to bring a voluntary shlamim also. And it was only after the voluntary shlamim that he brings that he cuts his hair, before he's brought any of the three required sacrifices. So this teaching in our Mishnah shows that according to Rabbi Shimon, that is okay, even though he has not yet brought any of the three required sacrifices. As long as he brought some sacrifice, that shaving is going to be okay. My timer, what's the basis for Rabbi Shimon saying that? And therefore, by the way, that is why, because when he brings the sacrifice, either the ola or the shlamim, for the wrong purpose, we say that even though it was brought for the wrong purpose, we still allow it to count as a voluntary sacrifice, and it's still a valid sacrifice, which means that the Kohanim get to eat from the portion that they get, and if it's a shlamim, the person gets to eat from the portion that he brought, and it's just a voluntary shlamim. So as a result, that's why it's going to work, because according to Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon says that any voluntary offering is fine. And how do we know that he says that? My time, what's the reason? Because take a look at the pasuk. The Amar Akra v'nasan al ha'esh asher tachas zevach hashlamim, that he should put the hair underneath the shlamim sacrifice. Lo kasav al shlamav. It doesn't say his shlamim. It doesn't, which would imply the specific shlamim of the Nazir. So Rabbi Shimon infers from here that any shlamim is sufficient. And according to our Mishnah, not only would he say that about the shlamim, but presumably he would say that also about an ola. And so as a result, even now, of course, unfortunately, we don't paskin like Rabbi Shimon. And so the bottom line is that the person would be stuck. So we've now seen one situation of something going wrong where the person offered a sacrifice and cut their hair, thinking that the sacrifice was valid, and it turned out to be invalid. So as a result, the good advice that you want to give to any Nazir, of course, we don't have the ability to offer sacrifices, so the person who's a Nazir is Nazir forever. But if we have sacrifices again, the good advice that you want to give to a Nazir is make sure you wait until after all three sacrifices, so that at least if one of them is valid, your shaving is valid, and you don't have to wait 30 additional days, according to the rabbis, in order to be able to do your end ceremony. And so that would be the good advice that we would want to make sure to give. So now tomorrow so that now we're ready for the last Mishnah, again, which deals with a final deep problem, final Mishnah detailing a problem that could occur during the offering of the, that's right, offering of the final sacrifice. And we're going to start the Maseches, the 7th chapter of Maseches Nazir, which, God willing, we will do tomorrow. And if you are wondering, because this chapter that we just dealt with has dealt with a number of the prohibitions, but we really didn't discuss in detail the prohibition about becoming tamei. We referenced it, but unlike the prohibition of drinking wine, and unlike the prohibition of shaving, where we really got into the meat of the prohibition, we did not do that in this chapter, and that is because it is the next chapter that will get us into that detail. And so, again, one final announcement, as I mentioned before we started, that I will be on a business trip this coming week, and so Dov will teach, God willing, the daf for me on Wednesday, in addition to his usual on Monday and Tuesday. And so Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday will be Zoom only. I'm going to be recording Thursday's daf sometime earlier, so it will be in the Bayit's email on Thursday morning. And God willing, we will be back together in person on next Friday. And I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom.
Next Friday, David.
Thank you.
Yeah.